Welcome to this explainer. We're jumping right into the deep end today to unpack exactly what human rights are, where they actually come from, and the fierce ongoing debate surrounding them right now. Whether you're a student of history, a law enthusiast, or just someone who genuinely cares about human dignity, understanding the precise anatomy of our rights is absolutely essential. We're going to get into the fine details today because, honestly, the stakes couldn't be higher. So let me ask you something right off the bat. Does the government give you your rights? Or do you just have them? It sounds simple, but it's a question that has literally toppled empires and shaped the entire modern world. Take a second to really ponder that, because how you answer that question changes absolutely everything about your relationship with the authority figures around you.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll be hitting 1. The anatomy of human rights. 2. 5 pillars and state duties. 3. Philosophy and ancient roots. 4. The historical timeline. 5. 3 generations of rights. And 6. Universalism versus cultural relativism. Let's get to it.
Starting with Section 1, the anatomy of human rights. Let's lay down the precise groundwork for what a right actually is.
Okay, so human rights. We're talking about the fundamental rights and freedoms that belong to you simply because you're human. They are essential for safeguarding your dignity and your autonomy. And notice a crucial detail here. These aren't granted by a state. It's not an act of charity from a benevolent ruler, and a government doesn't just hand you these rights like they hand you a driver's license. Instead, they're tied directly to your inherent capacity to think, to choose, and to act independently. At the very core of this entire concept is human dignity. It's this deep philosophical understanding that a person is indivisible, physically, intellectually, and emotionally. Why does that matter? Because it means your basic worth isn't determined by how useful you are to the economy or the state. It's yours the literal moment you take your first breath.
Now we have to draw a massive line in the sand between human rights and legal rights. Human rights are totally independent of the state. They apply universally to everyone, everywhere. Legal rights, on the flip side, are created by statutes or contracts. They depend entirely on national law. Think of it like this. A local law might legally permit discrimination, or maybe it denies certain people the right to vote. So in that specific country, you don't have the legal right to vote. But your human right to equality and political participation, that remains completely unbroken. They exist completely independently of the state. In fact, human rights are primarily used as a shield against the state, especially when lawmakers overstep and push unjust laws.
Moving on to Section 2, 5 pillars and state duties. Let's look at how these rights are actually structured.
There are 5 core pillars that make up the absolute bedrock of international human rights law, and we need to understand each one. First, they're inherent. That means a newborn baby possesses a right to life instantly, no earning it, no proving their worth. Second, they're universal. A person living in Bangladesh enjoys the exact same fundamental human dignity as someone living in Canada. Borders don't dilute your humanity. Third, they are inalienable. You literally cannot legally sell yourself into slavery, even if you try to sign a contract doing so, because fundamental dignity just can't be waived or transferred. Fourth, they're indivisible, meaning your freedoms are deeply interconnected. Your freedom of expression doesn't mean a whole lot if you're starving, right? And fifth, they are self-evident. We recognize them through pure moral reason. You don't need a complex math equation to prove that torture is wrong. Human reason inherently dictates it.
So how do governments actually deal with these pillars? Well, states basically have 2 distinct types of duties, stepping back and stepping up. A negative obligation means the state just needs to keep its hands off. They have to refrain from interfering in your life, like not arresting you arbitrarily or not censoring your speech. It just requires restraint. But a positive obligation, that requires the state to actively take action and spend public money. They have to step up, building schools for your right to education, or setting up hospitals for your right to health. And here's the really tricky part. Positive obligations are often much harder to enforce globally, simply because they depend heavily on a country's wealth and budget. That creates some massive complexities in international law.
All right, Section 3, philosophy and ancient roots. Where did the DNA for all of this actually come from?
Way before modern treaties were a thing, ancient civilizational codes and major world religions were already heavily emphasizing justice, compassion, and dignity. You've got the Hammurabi Code introducing proportionate justice, ancient Vedic texts promoting dharma and social harmony, the Bible stressing the absolute sanctity of human life, Buddhist teachings championing universal compassion, and the Quran highlighting equality and mercy. Now, there is an important nuance we have to note. While these texts laid incredible moral groundwork, they primarily focused on duties, what you owed to others or to the divine, rather than legally enforceable rights that you held. Translating those religious and moral duties into actionable legal rights took centuries of struggle. But they provided that absolutely crucial ethical foundation, the idea that human life has inherent worth across all cultures.
Philosophically, this idea evolved in a few massive leaps. It kicked off with ancient Greek and Roman natural law. Thinkers like Cicero argued that universal reason connects all of humanity. Then, moving into the medieval period, theologians like St. Thomas Aquinas argued that any human-made law that contradicts fundamental justice isn't even a true law. It's just an act of violence. Fast forward to the 17th century, and John Locke completely revolutionizes the game with his natural rights theory. He brought in the concept of pre-social rights. What does that mean? Well, imagine you're just a person living alone in the woods, long before kings or parliaments were ever invented. Locke argued that even in that natural state, you inherently possessed rights to your life, your liberty, and your property. You didn't need society to grant them to you.
Locke went even further. He argued that the only reason governments are created in the first place is to protect those natural pre-social rights. And if a government fails to do that, the people have the authority to alter or abolish it. This explosive idea directly inspired the American Declaration of Independence in 1776, famously stating that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That wasn't just pretty flowery language. It was the exact moment when deep abstract philosophy was literally weaponized into a real-world, revolutionary legal claim against a massive monarchy.
Which brings us to Section 4, the historical timeline.
Let's quickly trace how these concepts morphed into structured international law. It formally kicks off around 1215 with the Magna Carta, where the English king was forced to agree that no free men could be punished without lawful judgment. That established the vital rule of law. Fast forward to 1789, the French Declaration of the Rights of Man forcefully asserts that men are born free and equal. Throughout the 19th century, international law starts shifting to protect vulnerable groups. Treaties banning the transatlantic slave trade, the Geneva Conventions humanizing warfare. But the real game changer was the 20th century. The unimaginable atrocities of the Second World War and the Holocaust completely shattered the illusion that nations could be trusted to protect their own citizens. A global framework wasn't just a good idea anymore, it was an absolute necessity for survival. And that led straight to the creation of the UN and the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948.
Next up, Section 5, 3 Generations of Rights. As history moved forward, legal experts started categorizing our rights into 3 distinct generations. And it's a pretty fascinating breakdown. First-generation rights are civil and political, stuff like the right to a fair trial or free speech. These came out of the 18th century revolution centered around liberty, and they mostly require those negative state obligations we talked about. Just stay out of my way. Second-generation rights are economic, social, and cultural, like healthcare and education. These grew out of the industrial revolutions and socialist movements focused on equality, demanding positive state resources to fulfill. And finally, third-generation rights are collective or solidarity rights. Think of the right to a healthy global environment or international peace. These arose from post-colonial movements focusing on fraternity, with the realization that these massive goals need widespread international cooperation. It's like a giant puzzle of human progression.
And finally, Section 6, Universalism versus Cultural Relativism.
We've arrived at the big modern friction surrounding these rights. On one side, you have universalism. This argues that because we all share equal human dignity, rights apply equally everywhere, no exceptions. The 1993 Vienna Declaration explicitly confirmed this. But on the other side, you have cultural relativism. They argue that rights have to be interpreted through local cultural contexts. For example, that very same year, the Bangkok Declaration argued that Western approaches focus way too much on the individual. They said this ignores Asian societal priorities, which might emphasize community, family structures, and social harmony over individual liberty. So in practice, a society might restrict certain free speech rights to prevent social unrest, prioritizing the community over personal autonomy.
Now, cultural diversity is obviously crucial for a functioning global community, but scholars warn we have to be incredibly careful here. Labeling human rights as purely Western completely ignores their diverse historical roots. More importantly, cultural relativism must never become a shield to deny core human dignity. In international law, there are these things called derogation clauses, essentially legal loopholes allowing a government to temporarily suspend certain rights during a massive public emergency. But some states misuse these, or they hide behind local custom to justify denying women equal rights or excusing horrific practices like torture. The global consensus remains rock solid on this. Tradition can never, ever be an excuse for abuse.
To wrap up this explainer, I've got a final, complex thought for you to chew on.
If we agree that core human dignity is truly universal, who holds the ultimate authority to decide when a specific cultural tradition crosses the line into a human rights violation? How do we balance global standards with local traditions in the ongoing fight to protect our shared humanity? It's a profound challenge, and it's one that every generation has to navigate for themselves. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.